Final Fantasy is no stranger to tales where a small group is facing off against an oppressive empire trying to conquer the world or achieve some evil goal beyond that. Final Fantasy II introduced that idea as you faced off against the Emperor of Palmacia as part of the Wild Rose Rebellion. Final Fantasy IV picked up on this theme as Cecil and his allies found themselves fighting against Cecil's former home Baron as it tries to destroy neighboring kingdoms while collecting the crystals. We find this theme yet again in Final Fantasy VI. The Gastalian Empire is seeking world domination. At the start of the story, it has the entire southern continent under its control, but as part of the story winds up conquering or attempting to conquer other locations like Doma, South Figaro, and Narche. This is the conflict the characters of Final Fantasy VI find themselves embroiled in, even though the conflict winds up escalating to the point where there is much more than an evil empire being fought against by the end of the game. Final Fantasy VI presents a wide and varied cast of characters that face this threat. Some of these have been fighting the Empire for some time, while others are former soldiers or generals of the Empire itself who are now acting against the Empire they once fought for. Final Fantasy VI has the largest cast of any main entry in the Final Fantasy series, with 14 different characters able to join your party over the course of the game. Here in this video, I want to give my ratings for the characters from Final Fantasy VI. Now, I tend to base my rankings much more off of a character's impact on the story and their personality than just kind of how strong they are as a character. While I'm certain that sometimes that is part of why I'm drawn to certain characters, I also know that the narrative impact is very important to me in weighing the various characters and how much I like them. Also, as usual with lists like this, there will be spoilers. It would be hard to explain why I enjoyed many of the characters without delving into some of the story events and how it shaped them. Lastly, as always, this is just how I would rank the characters. There are so many great characters in Final Fantasy VI, and I think a solid argument could be made for many of them to be at different places on the list. This is just mine, so feel free to shout out your favorites or to give a full ranking down in the comments. It's always cool to see how different characters connect with different people. So with all that out of the way, let's get to the characters, shall we? At number 14, I have Umuro. Umuro is one of the 4 optional characters you can recruit in Final Fantasy VI. Umuro is a Yeti that lives in the caves of Narche. You're able to recruit him in the World of Ruin after defeating the Esper Valagarmanda. This uncovers the entrance to his cave and allows you to fight him, although he'll only join you if you have Mog in the party. Umuro is at the bottom of the list because he really has no impact on the story at all and is probably one of the weakest characters on the list. I know I said that strength doesn't factor much into my rankings, but for those characters that really don't have much development over the narrative, it may be a bit of a tiebreaker. Since Umuro is functionally a berserker, you can't control his actions, and his equipment, except for relics, is unable to be changed. This just makes him fall behind everyone else in the party over the course of the game. He's kind of cool in his own way, but he still lands at the bottom of this list. At number 13, I have Gogo. Gogo is the second of the 4 optional characters you can recruit over the course of the game on the list. Gogo is most likely a callback to Final Fantasy V's famed Mimic Gogo that you had to face in order to get the Mime Job Crystal. To get Gogo in Final Fantasy VI, you have to go to a triangle-shaped island and face a Zone Eater. If you don't battle it, it will eventually swallow all the members of your party, and this will take you to a hidden dungeon, and at the end of it, you will find Gogo. Gogo is another character that doesn't have any real bearing on the story. There are fan theories out there that place Gogo as possible characters from the narrative like Daryl, Baram, Emperor Gastal, or Banon, but these are just theories that don't get any real evidence from what Gogo does in the story, which is pretty much nothing. While he's a bit more versatile than Umuro, he's still fairly low on the list. At number 12, I have Gao. Here is the first non-optional character on my list. Gao is a feral child that Sabin and Cyan find during their journey to Narche. He shows up after battles on the Veldt and can be recruited by giving him some dried meat. Gao is such an interesting character, but sadly he doesn't really have much impact on the story. He does help Sabin and Cyan get to Narche by giving them his treasure, a diving helmet, which somehow allows 3 people to breathe underwater while traveling through Serpent Trench. After this, the only real story thing that Gao has going on is that you're able to have a scene with an old man who's believed to be Gao's father in the World of Ruin. This doesn't have a direct connection to the story and doesn't really change or grow Gao's character much, but it is a fun set of scenes, even if it does end on kind of a sad note. The man claims to have had no son, even though it seems pretty likely that this isn't actually true and that Gao is likely his son. Despite this rejection, though, Gao is just happy that the person he thinks is his actual father is still alive. Now, Gao is kind of an interesting character because he doesn't really have a comparable job to the jobs that have been developed either before Final Fantasy VI or since. His special ability is Rage, and while on the Veldt, he can leap during battle to learn the abilities of the enemies you were facing, and then the enemies you defeated before he returns to the party, because he always shows up after combat has finished up. When using Rage, he copies the abilities of those enemies in combat. It's such a unique skill, I just wish that I liked it better than I do. I mainly wish there was a better way to get Gal's Rages instead of having to grind battles on the Veldt and leap on the enemies you don't already have. It just takes a lot of time and luck and can be a pretty significant grind. It would have been nice to have Gal just need to defeat them or have them in your bestiary, but that's just not how it goes. At number 11, I have Mog. Final Fantasy VI wasn't the first game to feature Moogles. Final Fantasy III on the NES holds that distinction. Even so, Final Fantasy VI was my first introduction to Moogles. This was because Final Fantasy III and V didn't come to the US when I was younger, and Final Fantasy IV didn't include them, even though it did come over here as Final Fantasy II. In Final Fantasy VI, though, they weren't just this race you got to interact with, you were actually able to recruit one into your party, a Moogle named Mog. Mog is the third of the 4 optional characters of the game. You're able to recruit him in the first half of the game during the World of Balance after raiding the Magitech research facility. If you return to Narche, you'll find that Lone Wolf the Pickpocket has stolen from a locked treasure chest in the city. If you find him and chase him, you'll catch up with him at the Frozen Esper. Mog is also there and winds up being taken hostage. Mog struggles and winds up knocking them off opposite sides of the cliff. You then have to decide whether to save Mog or get the item, a gold hairpin from Lone Wolf. Mog does have some impact on the story, but not a ton. I'd say his biggest contribution comes before you're even able to recruit him. Early on, when Terra winds up falling through the floor of the mines, Locke and the Moogles, including Mog, help defend her from the guards. Sadly, in the World of Ruin, you find Mog all alone in the Moogle caves of Narche. It seems that the rest of the Moogles didn't survive the destruction wrought by Kefka, and that Mog may be the last surviving Moogle. It's also possible that the Moogles are just somewhere else, if you're wanting kind of a little bit of a happier idea of what's gone on there. Regardless, he's happy to see you and rejoins your party, also letting you know about Umuro in the process. Mog may be a rather cute little guy, but he's still pretty low on my list. At number 10, I have Strago Magus. As the first half of the game is coming to a close, you wind up meeting with Strago in the mysterious town of Thamasa. Your party is trying to find the Espers that had destroyed Vector in order to negotiate peace. Strago admits to knowing about Espers, but then won't say anything more. He changes his mind after Locke, Terra, and Shadow help rescue Realm from a house that caught on fire, though. It is during this fire that we learn that the inhabitants of the town are descendants from the Magi who were involved in the War of the Magi 1,000 years ago. Afterwards, Strago also reveals that the Espers are likely in a cave nearby that is supposed to be sacred to the Espers. Strago is really interesting for some lore about the world, but he doesn't really have a lot of impact on the story. He comes late in the first half of the game, and then for some reason in the second he joins with the cult of Kefka in the World of Ruin. I get that he thinks that Realm has died and that's why he did it, but it just doesn't seem like a fitting place to find him really. It would honestly make more sense to me for him just to have gone back to Thamasa, waiting and hoping that Realm would one day return. You would still need Realm to recruit him, but this would make a lot more sense in my mind at least, but that's just not the way they went. He also has a weird side quest in the World of Ruin hunting a monster called Hidan. Apparently he tried hunting the monster in his youth, but the location sunk into the water and then he was kind of unable to complete his goal. It resurfaces though in the World of Ruin, and his friend Gung Ho and Realm convince Strago to give it another try, which ends in success. It's an okay side mission, but not as powerful as some of the other ones that go on in the World of Ruin for other characters. While Strago is good for giving some background to the world of Final Fantasy VI, he just doesn't have the most impact on the story, and that's kind of what lends him to be here on the list. At number 9, I have Setzer Gabbiani. I struggled to know exactly where to place Setzer. Setzer is basically the airship character of Final Fantasy VI. That is his overwhelming contribution to the plot in both the World of Balance and the World of Ruin. He's introduced to the story when he sends a letter to the Opera House saying that he's going to kidnap their star diva Maria. The party learns of this plot and decides to use Celis as a decoy since she looks exactly like Maria. This gives us the epic opera scene, but Setzer is mainly used as a tool to get an airship and isn't really involved involved very much in the story. In the world of Ruin, Setzer is one of the 4 characters you have to recruit, and that is so he can provide you with another airship. Turns out that Setzer used to have a friend, maybe even a lover, it's not really made fully clear, named Daryl, who also had an airship. Unfortunately, she died when she crashed her airship, and Setzer wound up restoring that airship and then sealed it in her tomb. That's pretty much the extent of Setzer's impact on the story. Gaining an airship is no small matter, but at the same time, Setzer's character is more than a little dubious in the whole affair. After all, he was going to kidnap a woman and force her into marriage. Oddly, that's just kind of all swept under the rug, and he becomes a willing member of the party fighting against the Empire and then Kefka in the second half of the game. Setzer was just not my favorite character, but his provision of not just 1, but 2 airships can't be overlooked. At number 8, I have Shadow. Here's another character that I didn't quite know where to put. Shadow is kind of a weird character in the game and is the 4th of the 4 optional characters. In the world of balance, he joins your group on and off. The first time you run into him is during Sabin's scenario when the party gets divided. You can have Shadow join you here and he will stay either until the game dislikes you and he leaves after a battle, or before you jump down Barren Falls. You can hire him again later, but it's of questionable value because he can again leave at any point. Lastly, he joins Terra and Locke on their mission to Thamasa, kind of at least, as he's constantly going off on his own during this time as well. This makes for a character that kind of has a lot of mystery and kind of expectation around him, but not a lot of actual playtime for the character, at least in the first half of the game. He does make a big contribution on the floating continent, pushing the warring triad statues in a way to trap Kefka and let the party escape his newfound powers. This is where Shadow's optional status comes into play. As you're escaping from the floating continent, there is a time limit on your escape. As you get to the place where you see the airship, you have the option to jump or to wait for Shadow. You have to wait until the last few seconds in order to be able to have Shadow survive and be in the world of Ruin. When you actually get to the world of Ruin, Shadow is a little more complicated to get than many of the characters. You first find him wounded in the cave on the Veldt and have to defend him from the Behemoth King. Afterwards, Shadow goes to the Colosseum to fight, and if you bet the Ichigeki weapon, you fight Shadow and he joins the party if you're victorious. As an added value, you have the ability to see memories from Shadow's past while sleeping at an inn. This shows bits and pieces of his life as Clyde, who was a train robber with his partner Baram. It also shows how he wound up in Thamasa and fathered a baby girl. It is heavily implied in a number of ways that this girl is Realm. This includes the fact that Interceptor responds well to Realm, their ability to both use the Memento Ring relic, and the connection to Thamasa in general. Sadly, Shadow's epilogue shows him giving up and not going with the party after defeating Kefka. Instead, he stays on the collapsing tower and calls out for Baram to come and find him, since in the past he had left Baram wounded to be taken by the authorities. This moment seems to have haunted Clyde/Shadow all of his life, and he decides to finally stop running. While I'm personally not a big fan of that ending, Shadow is a pretty cool and mysterious character. While learning about his background is a bit too random and unconventional, I also enjoyed how his history connected to people in the current time. At number 7, I have Realm, Aroni. While some characters you love based on story impact, my enjoyment of Realm's character has more to do with her personality than her impact on the narrative. Realm is introduced at the same time as Strago since she is his adopted granddaughter. She's just a pretty hilarious character. She doesn't really listen to authority and has a pretty quick wit on her. Her whole bit when the party is facing Ultros in the Esper Cave is really funny. She also likes to threaten people with painting their portrait since her job is a pictomancer, which kind of acts like the Beastmaster job, only with painting the enemy being involved in the process. Otherwise, she just doesn't really add a lot to the story. I did find the circumstances around her rejoining the party probably one of the more unique and interesting set of circumstances, with her painting a portrait of a goddess and having that painting being taken over by a demon, which requires the party to take it on. It was kind of a cool part of the story that hit on Realm's unique talent of painting as well, so it kind of really connected with her character. Other than that, she's involved with recruiting Strago and in his little side quest, but doesn't really contribute to the story any more than that. I just like the spirited 10 to 11-year-old girl who is willing to take on powerful empires and godlike beings. She can also become a great mage if developed right too, so she's no slouch in combat, at least once you get her some good spells. At number 6, I have Sabin Rene Figaro. Here's where I would say we enter into the creme de la creme of characters from Final Fantasy VI. These are all some of my favorite characters, and it was super hard to figure out which one went where. I'm starting with Sabin though because I feel like he has the least important story moments throughout the game. Sabin is the younger twin brother of Edgar. You first meet him at Mount Colts as he helps you defeat Vargas. Sabin believes that Vargas has killed his master Duncan, who is also Vargas's father. He joins your party after that as you head head to the Returner's base. While Sabin is the main lead of one of the split scenarios, I feel like his impact in that scenario is not that strong. The weight is more on Cyan's narrative here than on Sabin. And this is kind of true throughout the narrative. Sabin is a loyal and strong friend, always in the mix and always willing to help, but he doesn't really have too many moments that stick out for himself, where he's really the active and the main driver of story elements. This is even with him being the second party member you get back during the World of Ruin. His story is basically him helping hold up a building while Celos runs in to save the boy inside. He's a good dude here, but it's just not really too elaborate. His biggest reveal in the story is about how Edgar used a double-headed coin to allow Sabin to pursue what he wanted with his life while Edgar took on the responsibility of ruling Figaro. Seeing the brothers reminisce about those days and where they are now was a pretty cool moment in the story. Granted, even here, Sabin was more of a passive figure to Edgar's plan, but it doesn't mean I don't enjoy Sabin. Sabin is one of my favorites from the game, as he's super loyal and supportive in the role he's given. It's just too bad that the role isn't a bit larger in the overall narrative. However, he does get the ability to suplex a train in one of the boss battles, so maybe that makes up for it. At number 5, I have Cyan Garamond. Cyan's story is one of loss and grief and is probably one of the most heart-wrenching narratives of the story. Cyan is a samurai of the kingdom of Doma. He is introduced into the story during Sabin's scenario when the Empire is attacking Doma. Kefka poisons Doma during this time, and this results in the death of everyone but Cyan. This includes the death of his wife Elaine and his son Owain. This causes Cyan to storm the Imperial camp alone, where he meets Sabin and joins him and eventually joins the rebellion. To make matters worse, Sabin and Cyan wind up finding and boarding the Phantom train, and while they're able to escape and not be taken to the afterlife, Cyan winds up seeing all of those killed at Doma, including his wife and son, boarding the train, and this loss just has a huge impact on Cyan. In the World of Ruin, Cyan is writing letters to Lola, a woman who in the World of Balance had been communicating with her boyfriend who was wounded and in the town of Mobliz. Mobliz had been destroyed by Kefka and her boyfriend killed, but Lola didn't know this and still sent a letter daily. Cyan learned of this and started to impersonate her boyfriend, sending her letters and silk flowers. The party finds him by following one of the carrier pigeons delivering Lola's replies. At this point, Cyan is realizing that both he and Lola are stuck in the past and that she needed to move on and find love again. Cyan's pain due to his loss comes up again if you visit Doma and rested in the barracks. Cyan doesn't wake as the Dream Stooges are feeding on his soul during his nightmares. Even after you beat them, you eventually learn that behind it all is a being called Rex Soul, who is feeding off all the guilt and pain that Cyan still feels about the destruction of Doma and the loss of his family. It is only after the party defeats Rexel and the appearance of his wife and son that Cyan is finally able to move past his confusion and doubt, which leads him to being able to learn his ultimate Bushido skill. Cyan's story is an emotional journey through loss and guilt. Since this loss is carried by Cyan for quite a bit of the narrative, it really makes his story one that really hits you. Seeing his loss and his eventual ability to move past it grows him both from a narrative viewpoint, but also within the gameplay of the game. At number 4, I have Tara Branford. Tara seems like she's going to be the main character of Final Fantasy VI from the early game. She starts the game under the control of the Empire and is able to use magic naturally. We are introduced to her in the middle of a mission to find out if a rumor of Narche finding an Esper in their minds was true or not. This mission goes all kinds of wrong and kills the soldiers controlling Tara and knocks her unconscious. She is found, and after the mind-controlling device is removed from her, it turns out that Tara has lost a good part of her memories, only remembering her name. Tara is then the center of a good portion of the early narrative. Her ability to use magic is a great asset, and both the Empire and the Returners would love to have her power added to their side. All of this winds up being rather overwhelming to Tara, who doesn't even know who she is and feels like she doesn't quite have normal human emotions like love. She does eventually join the Returners, and after another attempt to interact with the Esper at Narche, Tara transforms and flies off, leaving the party. When the party finds her again, they learn that she is actually a half-human, half-Esper. She was born after a human woman stumbled into the Esper world and then fell in love with an Esper there named Maduin. It is here, though, that Tara begins to have her importance start to wane. Her main benefit story-wise was her ability to use magic, but after the party gains the use of Magicite, everyone's now able to gain this ability. While her half-human, half-Esper status does give her a unique position to be able to negotiate when Emperor Gestal claims to want peace with the Espers, it is just another time when Tara is used by the Empire for their own ends. This results in the raising of the floating continent and Kefka unleashing destruction on the world. In the World of Ruin, Tara has pretty much lost the will to fight when you first meet her. She's taking care of the children of the destroyed town of Mobliz and desires to understand the new feelings she's feeling due to her taking care of these children, many of which who have started calling her mama. After the town is attacked by the demon Humbaba a couple of times, Terra eventually realizes that she loves the children she's been taking care of and rejoins the party in order to give them a better world and future by taking down Kefka. As the end of the game approached and the showdown with Kefka loomed, there was a question about whether Terra would survive if they took down the sources of magic, since that is also what sustained the Espers. It turns out that due to Terra being half human and having a strong reason to survive, she was able to survive, although now only as a human. Terra's story is about finding out who she is and finding her place in the world. Will she find love? What is her reason for living? These are interesting questions, and I really like the fact that these questions aren't answered by a romantic love, but rather of finding a more familial love. It just seemed more fitting for Terra's story that that's the way they went, so I'm really happy with that direction. At number 3, I have Locke Cole. Locke is the second character that you meet in the game. He arrives at the house Terra was recovering in, only to find that she had to flee to the mines due to the Narche guards. Locke finds her just before the guards close in on that location, and he is able to fight them off with the help of a group of Moogles. Locke is a very interesting character. Despite being a thief, a treasure hunter, Locke is a very loyal and caring character. Like many of the characters, he's holding a burden of his own, which makes him very protective of the women in his life. This plays out particularly with Terra and Celes in the party. This protectiveness stems from an earlier love in his life named Rachel. She was wounded while protecting him and lost her memory. This led to Locke being pushed out of her life and him leaving her town to let her build a life without him, confusing her. However, the Empire attacked Rachel's town and killed her while he was gone. While she is still being preserved by a strange old man in the town, Locke feels guilt over what happened to her and blames the Empire for her death, which is why he joined the Returners. Now, a particularly fun part of the game is when Locke is separated from the main party, doing some sabotage work at South Figaro. Here you get to find some treasures that are being worn by people, by stealing their clothes, and dressing up like them in order to make your way out of the city. It's fun to watch Locke take the clothes right off of merchants and soldiers and put them on himself. On a more serious note, this is also where Locke meets Celes, a former general of the Empire, and frees her. Locke and Celes had the only romantic relationship among the main cast, but even then this doesn't really progress too far in the story. By the end, they're maybe willing to acknowledge their feelings for each other, but it doesn't really go any further than that. During the World of Ruin, Locke is found in the Phoenix Cave, finally finding the treasure that he believes will revive Rachel. This does succeed in reviving Rachel, but only for a few moments. During this time, Rachel reaffirms her love for him and says that she has no regrets saving Locke, and that it is time for Locke to let go of his guilt and learn to love again and move on with his life. While a touching scene, it does help Locke start to move forward, and he rejoins the party at this point. I've always really liked Locke as a character. He's resourceful, funny, loyal, and protective. He may not always be the most honest with his feelings due to the guilt and pain he's carrying with him, but I always liked the relationship between Celes and Locke, even if I would have liked to see it progress a bit more than it actually did in the game. At number 2, I have Celes Cher. I find Celes to be such an interesting character within the narrative of Final Fantasy VI. While Terra was a part of the Empire, her involvement wasn't exactly voluntary. Celes is a little different, although it's unclear how different it was since she was infused with magic at a very young age. So while Celes maybe wasn't directly controlled like Terra, she could easily be viewed as being indoctrinated by the Empire. Regardless, Celes winds up rebelling against the Empire, likely due to the hearing of Kefka's plan to use poison against Doma Castle. It is here that she is rescued by Locke and then becomes part of the Returners. With this change of loyalty, Celes was very hard to approach, and there was also the suspicion that Celes wasn't completely loyal to the cause. Cyan was always a little distrustful coming off of the atrocities that the Empire had just caused his homeland. And this really comes to a head in the Magitech Research Center, where Kefka claims that Celes has actually been acting as a spy. And the party and even Locke are unsure of what to think about this new information. Despite these doubts, Celes still winds up protecting Locke and the party and teleports Kefka and herself away. The next time we see Celes, she is back with the Empire and joining in on the mission to find the Espers. We are given no explanation for this. Was Celes really a spy and actually never left the Empire? Was she reinstated back to her rank as a sign of goodwill and to help demonstrate that the Empire was changing? We don't really know. Honestly, I tend to view this as Celes being reinstated as a sign of trust and the hope that the Empire is changing its ways. What better way to work with some of the people from the Returners than somebody who had already been part of their party? I think this is also boosted by the fact that all the people on this mission were the ones in the dark to the Empire's true goal. Even Leo, who was a loyal member of the Empire, was struck down by Kefka here. I feel like it makes more sense in the narrative, but then you have Gestalt still wanting Celes to join him on the floating island, so again, it's just not fully clear. To be honest, this is the part of Celes' story that probably keeps her from the top spot for me, because it's just kind of unclear where her loyalties really were in this period of time. And while I think that they were mostly with the party and the returners at this time, there's enough other evidence that just make it a little murky, and I wish for clarity on that, I guess. Otherwise, I like so many aspects of her story. She's an insider who objects to the wickedness of the Empire and joins the Resistance. I am also always a sucker for romance, and I enjoy her and Locke's interactions with each other, even though, as I said earlier, I do wish things developed a bit more than they did. I also really enjoyed seeing her be Maria, and the opera scene was pretty amazing. Celes is also the driving force of getting the party back together in the second half of the game. She wakes up a year after the cataclysm brought by Kefka, and eventually seeks out the other party members, unsure if they are alive or dead, but hopeful of their survival. While she doesn't have any more major story moments in that second half of the game, I still viewed her as the main force of continuing the fight against Kefka even after the destruction of the world. And at number 1, I have Edgar Roni Figaro. My absolute favorite character of Final Fantasy VI was Edgar. Edgar is a man of many talents. My least favorite aspect of his character is probably the fact that Edgar is a bit of a womanizer and hits on anyone, and I do pretty much mean anyone who is female. This may just be a bit of headcanon, but I always felt like this was Edgar's way to disarm people and get people to kind of underestimate him and think he was just kind of a skirt-chasing fool. Kind of like how some renditions of Bruce Wayne show him as just a playboy chasing after women in order to kind of have people underestimate him and not suspect that he's really Batman. Regardless of how this trait actually is, Edgar is a reliable member of the party. He may not strike you as rather kingly, but Edgar is the king of Figaro. He became the king after the tragic death of his father 10 years before the start of the game. It was rumored even then that he was poisoned by the Empire, but little really seemed to be done about looking into these rumors, and it doesn't really come up anywhere else in the game. While Sabin was infuriated by the whole situation and wanted Edgar to join him in running away so that they could live their own lives, Edgar knew that this wouldn't be good for the people of Figaro, and with the help of a two-headed coin, allowed Sabin to choose what he wanted to do. Sabin chose to leave, and Edgar became the king. It was his care for his people, even then, that led him to take the crown, even though he wonders how well he's doing in the role. Edgar also proved to have a very tactical mind, having Figaro being allied with the Empire while secretly backing the returners. He's also able to outflank Kefka when he comes to try to take Terra early in the game due to the castle's ability to go underground and travel an underground path. He was also able to figure out the truth behind Emperor Gastal's plan while in Vector by exchanging pleasantries with one of the serving girls. This cleverness and care for his people shows up again in the World of Ruin as he disguises himself in order to join a group of thieves that escaped from Figaro Castle while it was stuck somewhere underground. Edgar called himself Gerard and became the leader to find the way back to the castle under the pretenses of robbing it. I haven't even talked about the fact that Edgar is adept at using machines. While the game never really says how many of Figaro Castle's updates are due to Edgar, I tend to think that he's had a hand in the technologies that Figaro employs. This also gives him the tools ability in combat, which is a consistently powerful ability throughout the game. Edgar has always been a character I've enjoyed. His combination of wit, loyalty, intelligence, and kind of goofiness all come together to make a character that feels central to many of the events of the game. While his flirtatious ways may be a little cringy, even to others in the party, he's a good man and a character that I'm very glad is on our side. Whew, that is a lot of characters to go through, but finally got through it. I really enjoyed Final Fantasy VI and the characters found in its story. It's not always easy to rank characters when there aren't really any that you dislike. This is the list I came up with though, but how about you? Who are your favorite characters from Final Fantasy VI? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But that's all for this video though, so I'll see you in the next one.